afternoon from the sunny Copenhagen, and welcome to the webinar Skills and Knowledge Gap Assessment in Energy Efficiency in Buildings, EEB Sector in Argentina, hosted by Copenhagen Center on Energy Efficiency. My name is Begonia. I'm working as a research assistant at the Copenhagen Center, and I will be the moderator for today's webinar. A couple of things before we move to the main content of our webinar. This webinar is going to be about 75 minutes long, including time for Q&A at the end. And in case you cannot stay until then or want to get back to our presentations, all the materials and the recording of the whole webinar will be available online in a few days. Before we start discussing about today's webinar, I would like to inform our attendees that we comply with the General Data Protection Act, also known as GDPR. This means that your personal data, such as name, email, workplace, is safely processed and stored, and all of your rights pursuant to the GDPR are respected. You have full access to the data being processed about you, and at any time, you can request that the necessary data be deleted or rectified. For access or further information, please contact with the people that are presented here. A few things about the Copenhagen Center. The center conducts research and advisory activities in the field of energy efficiency and serves as energy efficiency hub for the Sustainable Energy for All initiative. The center has an established network of global, regional, and national partners with a broad range of stakeholders to help accelerate the implementation of energy efficiency activities. And now, I would like to briefly introduce the speaker of today's webinar. Guillermo Martínez is currently the National Director for Electricity Generation under the Secretariat of Energy of the Argentine Republic. Ivana Audia is currently working as a climate change technical advisor at UNEP DTU Partnership, UDP, on climate change projects in relation to energy, waste management, AFOLU, and energy efficiency in developing countries, in particular in the LAC region. Then we will have Talat Munshi. He's working as a senior advisor at UNEP DTU Partnership, UDP, and Denmark Technical University. At UDP, he's currently working on projects on energy efficiency, urban and transport planning, climate vulnerability, and climate action transparency. Leila Schein is currently an advisor on LCA in the Directorate of Sustainable Production of the National Ministry of Agriculture, Livestock and Fisheries. Finally, Mariano Sebastián Asensio is a senior energy technician with more than 15 years in energy efficiency in building sustainability and renewable energy. Finally, I would like to inform that you can send us your questions during the presentations using the dedicated icon, and we will do our best to answer as many as we can at the end. Please do not forget to mention the name of the panelist that the question is for. In addition, the Copenhagen Center on Energy Efficiency will distribute a certificate of attendance for this webinar. To receive it, you have to attend the webinar at least 50% of the total time, something that we can check through our system at the end of the webinar. Now, I will give the floor to Guillermo Martín, our first speaker. Guillermo, the floor is yours.
Good morning. Thank you. Good morning to everyone. We are glad to join this webinar and welcome everybody following us by the web. With your permission, I will read a brief welcome speech mentioning some of our government initiatives in this subject. We welcome you to the webinar Skills and Knowledge Gap Assessment in the Energy Efficient Building Sector in Argentina. The National Office for Electricity Generation, under the Secretariat of Energy in Argentina, is in charge of designing the different public policies on energy efficiency according to the specific requirements and needs of each sector. As regards buildings, the National Program for Housing Labeling has the main goal to implement measures aimed at improving the energy efficiency level in the housing construction sector. Since 2017, this department has lectured more than 14 housing labeling courses and has trained more than 650 professionals to estimate the energy performance index of buildings. The National Program for the Rational and Efficient Use of Energy in Public Buildings is focused on the public sector, and its implementation allows the improvement of the energy efficiency in the buildings used by different levels of our administration. Up to now, more than 700 energy managers and more than 1,000 public buildings were registering, accounting for more than 3 million square meters, and more than 65,000 of buildings were classified under this program. The Education National Strategy for Energy Sustainability is being implemented by our Education Department, which, with the support of the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Environment and Sustainable Development, is responsible for the design of education policies in order to contribute to the necessary process for the energy transition. Among some processes, it is worth mentioning the society's behavioral changes needed for the responsible use of energy and the development of technical abilities to foster this path. Both departments, under the National Office, with the support of the Copenhagen Center on Energy Efficiency and the Sustentable consultancy team, have participated in the project called Gap Assessment in the Abilities Acquired for the Approach and the Spread of Energy Efficiency in the Construction Sector in Argentina, which outcomes will be shown today. The COVID-19 pandemic has revealed the weakness of the system to which we belong. Hence, both the administration and we, as the members of the society, have the chance to think about alternative options and make decisions to lead us to a sustainable future. Thinking deeply about the ways of energy consumption and management should not must be a challenge, but particularly as far as the construction sector is concerned, due to its great potential on this issue. We would like to thank C2E2 for its collaboration and the organization of this webinar, which I hope is useful for all the participants. So let me introduce Ivana Audia, who will speak us now.
Thank you so much, Guillermo. Good afternoon, everyone from Copenhagen. My name is Ivana Audia, and as Begonia mentioned, I work as a climate change technical advisor at the UNEP DTU Partnership, which is a UNEP collaborating center operating under a tripartite agreement between the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Denmark, UN Environment Program, and the Technical University of Denmark, DTU. As announced, this webinar will present the process and the results obtained from the project assessment of the skills and knowledge gap in energy efficiency in buildings, which has been developed in Argentina over the last year, despite the challenges of the pandemic. Today, we are going to describe the main results and the perspective of different stakeholders, mainly from the education sector, but also from the government and the private sector. Likewise, we will present a proposal to address and mitigate the gap and develop lines of actions to expand energy efficiency in Argentina. First of all, I wanted to briefly explain why we have considered important to launch this study. So, as you know, there is a growing demand for energy in developing and emerging economies. The need for heating and cooling, the increased penetration of electrical appliances, and the change of fuel for cooking have increased the demand for energy, especially in the building sector. The energy sector in developing countries faces several complex challenges, such as growing energy demand, energy dependence, of course, climate change, the expansion of the electricity system, and increased consumption. Argentina ranks third among the Latin America countries with the highest energy consumption. The government has taken several initiatives in this regard, and there are policies, but to implement this project, skills and knowledge are required, both among professionals and also professional in service work in the energy efficiency sector, but also among people from the education system. to achieve the ambition of doubling the energy efficiency rate and for governments to accelerate the development of public-private energy efficiency implementation projects, the right mix of people and skills is required. In order to make this possible, it was necessary to ask basically a basic question to understand what was the status of the existing training programs. So what is taught in secondary, post-secondary, and university education, what changes and modification should be done in the current programs, what actions need to be taken to address the demand for knowledge and skills about energy efficiency in the future. So for this reason, it has been considered necessary to review the program taught in technical education, secondary schools, and of course, as well in the university in Argentina. And finally, we also found necessary to review and compare the skills of service professionals. I would like to mention that we have conducted the same study also in other countries. Indeed, the project had a different focus in 3 different sectors and in 3 different continents. So while in Argentina we have been focused on the building sector, in Kenya the project is evaluating the manufacturing sector, and the third continent and and also sector is transport that we have studied in Sri Lanka. In the specific case of Argentina, the objective of our study has been to evaluate the skills, as I said before, and knowledge gaps between professionals who work in the energy efficiency sector, in the building sector in Argentina, of course, and in the educational programs that train these professionals. So for this reason, once the gap in skills and knowledge necessary to implement energy efficiency project and policy has been identified, what we have done, it was to review the best practices in different countries that have served as a good example for Argentina. My colleague Talat will explain this in more detail in his presentation after me. At the end of this evaluation process, we have proposed some recommendation to update the academic curricula in Argentina, and thanks to the consultants of Sustentable. Of course, they will give you also more details in their presentation. Thank you, everyone. For any question about the project, feel free to reach out to me. Here is my email. You can also be updated on our project by checking our LinkedIn page. And finally, I'm happy to mention that the report in Spanish is available on the C2E2 website. You can see the link here in this slide. And the English version will be available in the coming weeks. Now I will give the floor to my colleague Talat. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Ivana, for the wonderful presentation and linking the project to me. So what I will present is the work that was done mainly by one of the students who did this MSc with me, Victor, and where we looked at skills and knowledge in the building sector, mainly but in the engineering skills aspects in Europe, and then tried to see how Argentina can learn from it. And to introduce, I work in the same department as Ivana works at UNEP DTU Partnership, and Ivana has already introduced the institute to you, so I don't need to repeat that. So generally, like as Ivana said, the primacy of Argentina in need for implementing energy efficiency is quite high. But even in globally, like the building sector contributes to 36% of the global energy demand, 39% of the global CO2, and basically 77% in the increase of energy use. So therefore, if you had to like implement the Paris Agreement and support it, it is very important that the building sector becomes more energy efficient. To make the building sector more energy efficient, in Europe, they have implemented this nearly zero energy building concept. And to support that in Europe, like for years, like after 1970, the transformation towards green building had already started. But the boost came up, I think, in early 2000, in the starting of this um, century, wherein standards were introduced and the transformation change towards building sector happened, and it was well supported by the educational curriculum. So this was done through the review of it was done through this MSc study done by my student, which can be available if somebody wants it. So what was done was, first the concepts of NZEP buildings were looked at, and vis-a-vis those concepts, the review of academic curriculum and the pedagogy was done for identified courses, and then relevance for Argentina was sort of. And there were some recommendations done for Argentina, but I will not present that. I think I will allow my next presenter to do it, who is Leila. So basically, like, this is the landscape of what people would look at in energy efficiency when they're looking at energy efficiency in building. But in the study that Victor did, we only concentrated on sustainable buildings. And within sustainable buildings, we identified that the skills, several skills categories, starting from general concepts, sustainable architectural design, envelope design, ventilation systems, climate and comfort, heating and cooling systems, domestic hot water and lighting. So, and as a next step, then we looked at universities where such courses are taught across Europe. And we found out that there are a large number of courses within that teach elements of NZEP, and there are certain publications also which mention about it. Denmark, UK, and Ireland are leading with large number of courses in this sector. But while choosing the case study which had to be relevant for Argentina, we had to look at the agroclimatic regions of Argentina, because Argentina being a large country, there are several agroclimatic regions in Argentina. And we find, like, from zone 1 to zone 6, the climate changes from a very hot climate to a very cold climate in zone 6. So which for that, I think Europe sets up well also. And we looked at different regions in Europe, and we picked up 4 universities. University of Polytechnic of Madrid, that will be called UPM further, which is in southern part and also relates well with the climate, with similar climate in the northern and central parts of Argentina. The Technical University of Munich, which has more temperate climate, which probably compares well with the moderate climates in Andes region of urban Quebec and Andes region zones. Technical University of Denmark, and we also looked at Chalmers University in Sweden. In terms of their pedagogic approach also, all these universities differ from a very theoretical approach in UPM in Spain to a very practice-based approach at DTU in Denmark. So a theoretical approach would be more like in classroom teaching, and a practical approach would be in classroom teaching supported with a lot of practical experience. All of these 4 universities that we picked up had both bachelor level courses and master level courses, and some of the bachelor level courses were mixed with architectural courses also, and there were also pure engineering courses also. So within these courses, we looked at what were the contents, and what we found is that, like, aligned with the pedagogy, there were also certain courses, like, for example, in the courses at DTU had certain mandatory courses in semesters 2 and 4, which all students had to take, but they offered a lot of electives to students, wherein which allowed flexibility of students to choose their own pathways. And there were universities like the one in Spain, UMP in Spain, which gave students a fixed menu sort of courses, wherein they decided as to what were the learnings that the students should take. So the pathways that the students should take were already decided by the university itself. And the other universities, for example, Chalmers in Sweden, took the mixed approach. And for the skills identified, then we also mapped like what type of skills are provided by which of these 4 universities. So at the bachelor's level, because DTU offers a lot of electives and students to choose their pathways, so it covers the entire landscape, and the rest of the universities partially cover the landscape of all the topics related to NZEP skills. The domestic hot water skills were not taught at any other university except any other case university except DTU. Likewise, in the MSc courses, the landscape that is covered is much larger because these are more specialized and more topics are taught in all the universities. But again, here the domestic hot water is not being taught in any other university except DTU. We subsequently looked at, I think Leila is going to present more about this, but just to put a pointer here, we also looked at within this study that Victor did at certain universities and skills in Argentina. So when looking at the bachelor's course, we didn't find a lot of bachelor's courses that taught energy efficiency skills in Argentina. Probably there was one course here and there which would have taught energy efficiency skills in Argentina. But within the master level courses, the MSc level courses, which were mainly in the architectural programs, many of these skills were taught in Argentina. So there are programs in Argentina which teach, but looking at what has happened in Europe and the history of way the courses have developed in Europe, and we also feel that Argentina doesn't need to go start at 1970 where Europe started teaching courses, but Argentina can directly learn from what has happened in Europe and probably leapfrog from there. So that is why with the ministry, with the Secretary of Energy Efficiency and within the Ministry of Economy in Argentina, we developed this program wherein we looked at 5 regions in Argentina, and with the help of Zoom Sustentable, with Leila represents, we did a study wherein we conducted a survey of the training programs that are there which teach energy efficiency related courses at the national and at the professional level. Simultaneously, what we did was we did a survey of professionals and did a mapping of those professionals and identified the skills that they have, and also asked them questions as to where they acquired these skills from. We also did an analysis of the market situation. We talked to the stakeholders. All in all, like allowing us to do a diagnosis of the existing programs, of the demand, and also to identify and evaluate the gaps, and which in the end allowed us to come with a recommendation for different professional profiles. And I will hand over the floor to Mariano now, who will lead us to the results from this study. Thank you.
We are happy to share with you our team's searchings and to the last year in Argentina. The Sustentable team are Gabriela Soler, Leila Schein, and I, Mariano Asensio. Our objectives for the project were to have contextual assessment to analyze skills and knowledge gap among energy efficiency professionals, considering educational programs in 3 levels: technical and vocational education, undergraduate, mainly architecture and engineering, postgraduate, and then to propose lines of action focused on professional education, expanding EEB in Argentina. Our methodological approach is structured by different tasks: develop a professional profile for EEB, a market analysis of goods, services, and stakeholders along all the value chains, interviewed, surveyed, and workshopped with stakeholders. We analyzed supply and demand can characterize the gap. Finally, build recommendations as lines of actions to expand the energy efficiency in buildings in Argentina from an educational perspective. It's appropriate to mention that due to the lack of knowledge and public awareness and prevailing constructive logics with low efficiency materials, the building in Argentina can account for 33% of the country's total energy consumption and 20.8% of GHG emissions. This data from 2018. And however, recently there have been some improvements in public policies and regulations, such as the national housing labeling, as Guillermo said, and regulations such as the Buenos Aires province and City of Buenos Aires ordinance or Rosario City ordinance, all complies with EEB thermal conditioning of buildings and windows standards. The scope of the stakeholders initiated in 3 different groups: academy, government, and non-governmental, including professional associations and other sectoral entities. Overall relevance are market as actors. The academy covered the 3 educational levels related to the aforementioned scope, and while governmental stakeholders were a priori all considered relevant, at the end it was not possible to reach them all because basically of the pandemic. We are talking about education, economy, productive development, energy, etc. We made a diagnosis in order to understand stakeholders' perspective on the EEB and its possibilities of expansions in Argentina from an educational point of view. Our many tools were surveys, interviews, and workshops, from which we collect some insights as barriers and opportunities. Reduced or poor and concentrated academic offer, clusters of research with low dissemination and interaction, poor key concepts on actual curricula, private sector driving materials and technology market, but not comprehensively, the need for better regulation, appropriate tariff schemes, and more technical skilled public servants. Argentina educational system structure comes with 4 levels: preschool, school, secondary or middle, and high level. Vocational training happens between secondary and higher level education. This non-university level is grouped by technical and vocational education, and the higher level contains university and non-university levels. We analyzed with EEB keywords scan 3 main areas: the universities from CONEAU and non-CONEAU, some are official or non-official programs, non-formal courses, and the technical and vocational level through surveys and interviews with workshops too. All of them rescheduled and adapted because of the pandemic, like I said previously. Now I'm giving the floor to Leila to continue with the presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mariano. So in terms of results, what we've seen throughout our research in the undergraduate level is that we mainly analyze two different careers, a set of engineering careers, as we can see in the figure, and then architectures throughout different institutions. What we see is that architecture showed higher correlation, but was still very low, around 4%. Then in the next slide, for postgraduate level, we saw that, of course, there is a greater correlation than in the undergraduate and bachelor level because there is greater specificity, which was kind of expected. However, what we notice is that what we see in the first figure in the left is that there is a preference for non-university shorter courses, followed by diplomas, followed by specializations, masters, and then eventually PhDs. So what we see is that there is a slight preference towards shorter courses, which probably speaks about the real faster needs to get the contents faster. I'm sorry, I'm kind of repeating myself. And in the second figure, what we see is that we have a very concentrated offer in the Amber region, which is the metropolis of Buenos Aires, and the other provinces that have been studied showed a very poor offer in comparison. In the next slide, we see results for the technical and professional level, and in this case, we notice a very scarce information since the system is decentralized, meaning that each province designs their own curricula, so it is sometimes very difficult to get actual access to the information because it's not gathered together yet. And well, the fact that we weren't able to visit sites as we expected due to the pandemic made this levels data gathering a bit more challenging. However, we did see that, as we seen in the first figure, we have different degrees within this level, and that the most significant one is the vocational training. And we also notice in the other figure that there's still a very high geographical correlation, since Buenos Aires and Cava, which is Buenos Aires city, concentrate over 40% of the offer covering EEB contents. In the next slide, we sum up results. We see a very low frequency of appearances of EEB content at all educational level. We also see a lack of specific technical content. Information content, related contents are not cross-cutting. They are isolated and not necessarily connected throughout curriculums. And we did see a greater correlation in postgraduate tied to more specific contents. And of course, this very noticeable geographical concentration of the offer. In the next slide, we're going to show these the lines of action that were developed in different axes after the characterization and the analysis of this gap. We consider that it was necessary to raise awareness, especially among public officials on decision makers, and in establishing links between EEB related contents and energy savings, housing comfort, and climate change mitigation, since these are subjects that are being actually considered but not necessarily linked to EEB. Then we also consider that it's important to train these officials to better implement some technical regulations that could do much on EEB expansion. We also notice that we need to raise awareness among students in order to promote career path related to EEB contents, and that of course it is very necessary to train teachers and to integrate this topic in current updating systems for teachers. In the next slide, also in the training, in the educational policies axis, we saw that it was very important to strengthen EEB in general in the undergraduate level through elective subjects that could come in packages that could eventually lead to energy efficiency in building orientations for these careers, and could eventually lead to open programs as a progressive continuum that could help integrate these aspects throughout curricula. Then in the next slide, we see that it would be also very interesting to integrate a climate sensitive content by region, since as Talat mentioned before, Argentina has a very big extension, so it would be very interesting to establish this correlation openly and use it in curriculums, mainly in the technical level. Also, we saw that EEB contents should be aligned and show themselves closer to NDCs and other current policies, climate change policies that are already taking place, but are not necessarily linked to EEB yet. We also consider that it's very important to develop interdisciplinary skills among these professionals, because they are very valuable when leading to environmental complexities. And then we also saw that it was very important to assure educational information on those existing programs. On the next slide, we also work on other axes coming out mainly from stakeholders that we've been talking to when asked what were the main barriers in terms of EEB expansion in Argentina. Besides educational aspects, they of course also mention other aspects which became axes for which we propose lines of action as well. These are much more deeply detailed in the report, but they cover areas such as accreditation of professionals and curricula, a regulatory axis working on proposing regulatory frameworks, and a financial axis working on strengthening current programs of energy efficiency certification for buildings and relate them to mortgage credits and things that could be further developed on that area. So in the next slide, Mariano, thank you. What we could conclude is that this gap, it is actually multi-dimensional, because it has the education dimension from which we entered, but then there is another dimension of professional exercise and regulations and finance. And what we saw is that when willing to understand the problem and the gap, we end up receiving this feedback from stakeholders and how all these dimensions were interlinked. So this is something that needs to be acknowledged. We also saw a potential, the potential of combining the market drivers as push strategies and the regulatory frameworks as pull strategies to further develop EEB expansion. And we also consider that some basic and very simple technologies that are already here and even in some cases being nationally manufactured could be promoted and aiming to be massified through local manufacture in order to not be depending on imports and other constraints. And we also noticed how important it was, and this was very highlighted from our stakeholders review, how predictable frameworks help develop medium and long-term planification in these subjects as well. So on the next slide, Mariano, and just to wrap it up, we wanted to highlight that some existing policies, such as the National Housing Label Program, are, from our perspective and from our stakeholders' perspective, working on the right direction in terms to provide this expansion needed. We also consider that working on retrofit and renewal, it's very important and it's a key vector because it brings the possibility to change what is already there, and there is a lot of retrofit going on, and it should be very important that professionals are trained to work retrofits from this perspective, EEB and sustainability perspectives. And then what we also notice and like to highlight is that there is a very notable capacity for development of the sector, because there is a big commitment of actual practicing professionals, educators, researchers, technical teams, and government officials, which are really interested in continuing this and working towards the development and the expansion of EEB in Argentina. So we see that this could actually work and reach its full potential. I think that would be all from our side. In the next slide is just a big thank you for everyone involved in this project, which was, of course, a bit challenging due to unexpected changes and constraints for our plan of work. But we get to know and build networks between this huge community in Argentina that is actually beginning to work on this matter from different perspectives, and we really think that this could be a very successful task in the forthcoming years. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Leila, for the presentation. And I would also like to thank you, all the speakers, for all the great presentations. Now I will invite all the speakers to turn on the camera because I will introduce in just a second the Q&A session. Yes. Okay. So we have received some very interesting questions that I would like to introduce now. And the first question is for Ivana. Ivana, by when should the energy efficiency double? And what is the time frame for the target?
Yeah, I was saying that I think it's something linked to my presentation because what I was mentioning that the main goal is to double the rate of energy efficiency. Yes, so the target is 2030 because the main objective of the Sustainable Development Goal of doubling energy efficiency in the world, actually, so not only in Argentina, is by 2030, and this is also part of our main goal with the C4O. What I was mentioning is that, and of course it's global, that Argentina, like other emerging countries, what are doing is just to contribute to this goal. The building is our focus on this project. So what we have been doing, and has been really well explained before, is that we have been focusing on the building sector. But of course, the main goal globally is for everything. I hope answered to the question.
Thank you so much, Ivana. And then another question that is also linked to what I mentioned: is it this target only for buildings or for the whole energy system?
Yes, what I was saying just before is that the focus is not only for buildings. What we have been focusing is the building sector, but only for this project. But of course, the main goal is not only for the building sector.
Okay. Thank you so much, Ivana, for it. And then another question that we have received for Talat. Talat, how do you define the bachelor and the master in sustainable energy level in Argentina for this comparative research among the trainings?
So I think it is things are not very comparable because the education system in Argentina is quite different than the education system in Europe. In Europe, we follow the bachelor's and the master's system, the 3+2 system. But in Argentina, I think there are several pathways, and I think Mariano presented that. And I guess Mariano would be, or Leila would be better placed to answer this question.
Well, there are different programs, but what we have in Argentina is that our bachelor careers are quite long. They take from 5 to 6 years, maybe 7 for some engineering programs. So masters comes after that in packages of 2 or 3 years, and they do not necessarily take into consideration if your previous career was that long. So you end up probably needing 8 to 9 years to finish, to come out with a master degree after taking an engineering course, for example. And this is something that we've been studying in our research as well, because what we notice is that we have a lot of contents that are very generic and theoretical, and they are all mandatory. So we end up having very long bachelor programs, and if you really want to get up to a master degree, you need much more time than other countries to have the same degree, and not necessarily have the same level of training in some specific and more, let's say, innovative items such as EEB, for example. I don't know if that rightly answers the question.
I think it answers it correctly, because I don't know if the audience has to say, but I think in Europe you could get a master's in 5 years, and probably in Argentina you could get the same master's in 10 years, and probably not get a very specific skills also by doing the same thing.
Yes, thank you so much, Leila, for the response, and also Talat. Then the next questions that we have received are also for you, Leila. How did the pandemic impact on the development of the work?
Well, a lot actually, because we were supposed to be going to the provinces and get to have face-to-face interviews with these stakeholders, which are of course much more rich. We were also planning to visit some, I think there was, if I'm not wrong, Mariano, 2 congresses that were taking place, which all these stakeholders were going to get together to discuss these issues, like from the educational perspective, the governmental perspective, and the professional day-to-day barriers and struggles perspective. And of course, none of this happened. So we ended up doing an online workshop that was quite good, but it was an online workshop. We didn't have the opportunity to get to talk with as many people as we would have thought we would. So it was quite impactful. However, I think that we came out kind of right. It was a big impact for everyone, of course, but we have a very comprehensive approach to what could we do in these new conditions, along with Talat and Ivana. And well, I think that we quite managed to gather a lot of information anyway. Probably not as good as expected, but
yeah. I'm happy to hear it was a success, even though of the current situation. And the next questions they're also for you, Leila, but other speakers are also welcome to contribute if they think it's needed. So the following question: how did you select the provinces for the project?
Mariano, do you want to come in?
Yes. Yes. The selection of provinces responds to the Secretariat decisions. Because if they were working in other projects and they have some relations established in these provinces, and they said, okay, we selected these 5 provinces to work with, and we just take it. But it was. Yes.
I think in this project we worked very closely with the ministry and the Secretariat, and because we believed that because they have the deep-rooted understanding of what is happening in Argentina, and initial scoping of the project was done in conjunction with the Secretariat. And as Mariano correctly pointed out, these 5 provinces were an outcome of that deliberation with the ministry.
Yes, I like to say that the provinces are representative of all the climate situations and the climate zones of Argentina. So we can talk, and we can we have talked with actors of the different regions, and trying to be the more abarcative or federal as possible view of this project. So that's a good point, that it was not just provinces like in the same region or something like this.
Thank you so much, Mariano and Talat, for the contributions on this question. Then I would like to go into the next question. For you, Leila, and also, again, speakers are also welcome to contribute, other speakers. So the question is as follows. If you had to choose one, what would be the most significant barrier of the project?
Well, we're all the time working from an educational perspective, and at some point of the project, it was kind of hard to keep this focus on, because from what stakeholders were mentioning all the times in every possible instrument that we used to reach them, the surveys, the interviews, and the workshops, it seems that there are always many synergies, like interacting barriers, that because everyone was saying that they did not see educational policies alone working towards a solution for this, or as a main driver for this expansion. Of course, it was a big issue, but even educational people was pointing out that the problem was regulatory, or that the problem was that the government was not doing something that needed to be done, or that the market was not doing something that needed to be done. So this is something we noticed in the workshop, that there is a high interdependency of factors, or at least this is what it's perceived, and it's probably right. It's probably some characteristic of Argentina. It's like things may not necessarily work from one aspect only, because in other aspects there's also things that need to be enhanced. So I think that the barrier, the main barrier, is of course from the education perspective, because this is something that needs to change, and it needs to change as soon as possible, because these changes take a lot of time. So while we are still working on develop better regulatory frameworks and set better marketing conditions for these new products to flourish, we still have to work in the deep root of changing and updating educational curricula, because they would have a bigger impact throughout time, and it would help sustain these efforts. So for me, that's the main issue to be taken into consideration, and the fact that there is a lack of it is the main barrier.
Yes, thank you so much, Leila, for this very detailed response to the question. Then my following question, also for you, and what do you consider the most important recommendations from the project?
I think that is this that I have just said. We need to start acting in things that would have this mid to long-term effects right now, while we are still thinking about what we're going to do in the short term with these other aspects that also need to be addressed in order to promote this expansion. I don't know, anyone here can bring perspectives, please.
So I think what we have come out from this is interventions are required at multiple levels, because like if we are looking at changing a bachelor's course now, probably the gestation period of the product would be next 7 years or something like that, if we take into account everything, and some of the skills are required now in the market. So there are, so I think the report also, which is available, I think Ivana shared the link for it also on the internet, and it's in Spanish now. The English version is coming out soon. Gives out like there are interventions required at the meso level, at the micro level, and at the macro level, and certain interventions can come as short courses or elective courses introduced as of now, and then later on, like there could be a graded approach towards graduating people as sustainable engineers sometime in the future.
Thank you so much, Talat and Leila, for the responses. Those were all the questions I've gathered from the audience. I don't know if any of you want to add some final remarks before I close the webinar. This is the time for it.
I think it was a wonderful journey in this project, which started with a lot of uncertainty initially, but a lot of support from the Secretariat and also from the ministry. And I think it was a wonderful job that was done by Leila and her team at Zoom Sustentable. Ivana and I were very happy and are thankful to all in Argentina who supported in this endeavor at Copenhagen Center for Energy Efficiency.
Thank you so much,
Yeah,
Talat.
I will echo Talat, yes.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you everyone, and thank you all the speakers for the detailed responses to the questions. And as I mentioned, ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of the webinar. I would like to say thank you to the panelists for the informative and interesting presentations, and to the audience for their active participation. We hope that the presentations will be beneficial for all the stakeholders involved in energy efficiency, and thank you for your attention, and I wish you a good day or night from Copenhagen. Bye-bye.